is ridiculous, which I hope the legislature changes to force cities to put things on the ballot in the nearest election if citizens collect signatures. So that's the challenge of the next legislative session.
Well, they do that in California. California, everything's a referendum. It's a whole industry there. Like no matter what
It
the
works
issue, there's
really
a
well
referendum
out there.
for it. That's what I'm saying. Like that's what I'm saying. Like it's referendum.
Texas is fortunate that we don't have initiative and recall.
I was going to say this during the show, but as a highly respected contractor, Mustafa, I would think you would want to make sure that 149 million is available for highly productive communication contracts or proposals.
I've seen this stuff a lot. This is going to go back and forth. Eventually, it's going to resolve itself, right? I mean, the election's going to happen. 36 days from now, and then after that, it'll resolve it. I mean, again, it's a one-year budget, right? So it's a budget cut up until the election happens.
Hey, do you think Briones beats Cagle?
I think so, and again, the way I'm asking people to think about this is when Democrats draw a district or when a Republican draw a district, they do it for their own advantage. A precinct is twice the size, almost twice the size of a congressional district. How many times do you see districts flip? Right? Like it's very rare. And that's what you've got. You've got a district that was drawn to be a Democratic district, and it's almost twice the size of a congressional district.
Interestingly, Grant is running both Adrian's campaign and Briones' campaign. Does that help, from a communications professional perspective? Can there be convergence or you're sharing stuff?
No, I mean, they're two different areas, right? So there's nothing that you can share, but for the most part, Grant's run a lot of races in town. And so you've got somebody who's done this, for well over 2 decades in Houston and in Harris County. He represents Rodney, he represents Adrian, he's done a lot of countywide. So I think you've got an experienced hand running the race.
Okay, last week, Tamara Bell was here and made some very interesting points. She suggested that, number one, the average age of a Harris County voter is 60 or older. Number two, African Americans over 60 are the most devoted voters, and they're worried about public safety. And number three, they're also hacked off about what they see as the disenfranchisement or the stripping of power from 2 African American elected officials with the appointment of the election administrator. And there's no African American on the statewide ballot. Could there be a drop in African American participation in this midterm? Charles, thoughts?
I mean, I think, sure, not having, particularly for the Democrats, whose base largely consists of African Americans, who have been the kind of steam engine behind the Democratic Party, not having anyone on the ballot that looks like them is going to make a difference. But do I think it's going to make a significant difference enough that the Republicans are going to be able to overcome a lot of the challenges that they face with the Democratic Party? I don't know about that. I think that's the case. I think they're still going to turn out. I think there are still things that are motivating them to turn out. And so I see them coming out, but maybe not to the level that they did in previous elections, or if, it was Royce West on the ballot or any of these other folks who actually look like them and are talking. That's the other thing, is that there are a lot of folks who just are not speaking to them and speaking to the issues that they care about too. And that goes within the Democratic Party. I remember at the convention, I was not there, but I watched, I read something about it where there was the chair fight for the Democratic Party convention. One of the guys, the black guy who was running, said that this party was built on the back of black people, but yet they're not supporting them in the same way. And I think that's largely seen in this election cycle with the Democratic Party. And with some of the comments from some of the activists about Michelle Garza saying that they can't trust her because they don't know her yet and she's no Wendy Davis. Well, I mean, I don't really get that either. That struck me as kind of odd when I read that.
Hey, Gary, if you were advising Alex Nealer, how does she make the best use of this final 4 weeks?
Well, I think she continues to do what she's doing, Greg. She is out every day, every night. She's campaigning. She's doing house parties. She's seeing people. She's accessible to the media. She's raising an incredible amount of money. I think she's over $4 million raised at this point. She's done an amazing job, and she's a candidate with unbelievable energy. And you contrast that with Lena Hidalgo's Joe Biden strategy. She's basically, and you heard it from Mustafa, oh, the Democrats have a majority in Harris County and you can't overcome it. So Lena said, well, I'm going to do what Joe did. I'm going to go hide. And that's what she's done. And I think it's a big mistake. I think the voters wanted to see them both talk about these issues. And she will not confront Alexandra. Her campaign is totally disingenuous because she's talking about abortion. And that's not an issue for the county judge. Last time I checked, if Lena cares about abortion, if that's her number one issue, she should have run for the legislature. Which, by the way, if you remember history, Greg, that's what she originally went to do when she went to the Democratic headquarters 44 plus years ago, looking for a thing to run for. The other incredible thing that I found, the community newspapers are running stories about the race, and they ask candidates questions. And you look at the basic resume of Alexandra Mueller, and you compare it with Lena's. And Lena says, well, I worked for the Texas Civil Rights Project, and I volunteered to help people in Asia. I mean, that's basic, and here, and I've been to college and got a graduate degree. That's her educational background. And she has to run on her record. You want to know why the courthouse is overcrowded? It started with the hurricane, but it got much worse under COVID because Lena closed the courthouse. You couldn't go. Everything had to be on Zoom. Well, on Zoom, nothing ever got done. So the cases continued to build up and you had a big backlog. Mustafa is shaking his head. She absolutely did that. And she continued to keep it closed, virtually closed. And let me finish. She continued to have it virtually closed, even after around the country, everything was opening up. So her track record does not deserve re-election, clearly. So Alexandra's doing what she needs to do. And I anticipate, much to Mustafa's chagrin, that Alexandra Mueller is going to be the next county judge. And when she gets in, by the way, we will get 1,000 new police patrolmen. She will absolutely deliver on her promises.
Gary, we were in a pandemic, a public health crisis. We didn't shut the courts, and Zoom is still effective. You're using Zoom.
Actually, you're wrong.
You're using
wrong.
Zoom to go to court.
You can't try cases with Zoom. You cannot plead cases with Zoom.
It's
difficult to negotiate on Zoom.
It's here to stay.
It's difficult to talk to your client on Zoom. All of that made it almost impossible. And she kept the courthouse closed. She just got rid of the mask thing 2 weeks ago. Are you kidding? People want to wear masks, great, but it was mandatory under her rules. The signs were still in the courthouse. Now, this lady was not qualified to begin with. She beat a great county judge by accident. Remember, she won, not because anyone knew who she was. She won because the Democratic straight ticket poll was strong because Beto was the celebrity of the moment.
And 25,000 people voted for the Libertarian, which
exactly
was enough votes.
We're just digressing for a second. Let's just go back to this court thing. Remember, there was a pandemic. It was a public health crisis.
It went too long.
Decisions had to be made at the time.
That's all.
It
went on forever.
Let Bob jump in here real quick.
So Chau, the difference is, yes, you've been in court on civil hearings, on family law hearings, maybe on CPS hearings, things like that. You can do that on Zoom. Criminal cases are different. You have different constitutional rights in play. You have all kinds of things that have to be done in person. You can't do a jury trial effectively through Zoom. And yes, at some point in time, it was the state Supreme Court rulings that shut down the courts and put it on Zoom. But they opened that back up, and Harris County did not. And right. So that's where the difference is, and why their backlog is so tremendously impactful on the jail, on the county's budget, on all of these things, because these people are sitting in jail at the tremendous cost of the taxpayers on cases that should have been cleared a long time ago.
Mustafa.
I don't want to beat this issue to a death because this is not a big issue, but just the jails and the prisoners are a little bit different. You have to be more cautious because there's 9,000 of them that live in the same prison. So if you bring them out and they contract COVID, it spreads much faster. There's a logic point here that you have to be really careful, especially at the time when the pandemic was.
But it wasn't that way in San Antonio, and it wasn't that way in Dallas. It wasn't that way in Austin. It was Harris County.
Every courthouse across the country was shut for a long time. It wasn't unique to Harris County.
I'm talking about the link.
Let's not keep talking about this. It's not.
Okay, I'm gonna change the subject to the Harris County Jail, and it's demonstrable. It is. Look, the Harris County Deputies Association was screaming, jumping up and down for over 2 years about the impending overcrowding, unsafe conditions in there, and met with the sheriff, met with the commissioners, and then felt compelled to file a federal class action lawsuit because people were dying. And detention officers were being injured. And they still didn't do anything. The outcry. Then we have a special needs kid, a 19-year-old, beaten to death in one of the most horrific crimes. We have a 60-year-old female detention officer brutally raped. They are understaffed. They've known it, and then we're forced to spend millions and millions of dollars to outsource these inmates to West Texas and to Louisiana. They knew this crisis was coming. They were warned of it, and they chose to do nothing. I call that willful negligence on the part of all the commissioners. Anyway, that's my editorial. Thoughts?
I mentioned you read Carrie Blakinger's op-ed in the Marshall Project. It's that published in the Chronicle. I mean, she goes into detail of the atrocities that are occurring in the Harris County jail.
We've been reporting them for over 18 months, as they happened.
I think there's a real apathy.
What Carrie's saying isn't anything breaking.
Well, but there's just a real apathy when it comes to people, inmates, and the county.
No, look, no.
There's a real apathy there.
Greg, what happened was that the commissioners, led by the 3 Democrats, are not willing to spend the money they need. Remember, Lena, you remember this, Mustafa?
2/3 of the budget goes to that.
She says, when maybe we need 100%. Lena comes in and says, there'll be no new jail beds on my watch. She said that. Remember, this is the same person who wanted Mustafa to empty the jail because it was going to be a COVID hotspot. Thank God she didn't get away with that, but she tried to. And of course, we have all these other wasteful spending that she did. So the bottom line is they're overcrowded and understaffed. We needed another jail. Actually, we have a big jail downtown that's virtually empty now that would have to be remodeled, but they could put young people in it, or they could put women in it that's next to the Criminal Justice Center. It's not up to current standards, but I mean, if you had $26 million to spend, maybe you could have thought about it and done it. But they didn't do that because their agenda, here's what the agenda is. And it's really pretty sinister. That Lena, Rodney, and Adrian know that if we let the jail deteriorate at some point, we're going to be ordered by the state board on jails to reduce the numbers in the jail, because that's what the agenda is. And they will order us to do it because we don't have enough guards and we're overcrowded. And then the excuse will be, we have to let 3,000 felons go because we're ordered to by the state, even though it's their benign neglect of the jail that caused this to happen.
A career law enforcement person, a police officer for 20 plus years, a guy who was the sheriff of Harris County, got on the commissioner's court, create a horrible thing where you can let prisoners out of jail. Like, I mean,
that is absolutely
conspiracy
true.
theory that emanates
Mustafa,
like beyond like anything any normal person can comprehend.
But Mustafa, understand. Look at law enforcement. Look at Jack Mormon and his law enforcement endorsements, and you look at Adrian Garcia, and 98% of law enforcement are endorsing Jack Mormon. So nobody cares about Adrian's background and experience because he was a terrible sheriff. He was a terrible sheriff, and he quit.
Lawyer telling that the commissioner's court and law enforcement wants to let people out of jail in thousands.
I didn't say law enforcement did. I'm telling you that your friends did, not law enforcement. The people who want to get people out of jail are Lena, Adrian, and
let people out of jail. All right, that's their public policy. You believe that people got elected, got to the commissioner's court, worked all this time so they can go in there and let 3,000 people out of jail.
That's what she said.
As a criminal defense lawyer, that's your argument.
Well, look at Lena's statement. Lena's statement, she wanted to empty the jail because it was a COVID hotspot. Fact check me.
That's your
I'm absolutely no. Greg, am I right? Did she not say that?
She didn't say empty the jail. That is your words.
She wanted to get all the people out of the jail because it was a COVID hotspot. Now
No.
you're making excuses for her. Just be honest. She did say that. and that was their agenda. So
In
look,
alignment
the
with
bottom
bond
line, we can
reform
argue
and
all we
misdemeanor
want.
cases.
No, she did not say that. And
In
you know,
alignment. She didn't say
no,
empty
because
jails.
COVID didn't know the difference between misdemeanors and felonies. No, it was all about COVID. We got to get the jail empty. Her goal, remember, no new jail beds, all of this. Look, we have now benefited, I guess not benefited, we inherited the world that they gave us. You know, look, very simple question for anyone voting in November in Harris County. Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Are you safer than you were 4 years ago? Are your taxes lower than they 4 years ago? That is the question. And when you vote Lena Hidalgo out, you vote Adrian Garcia out, and you keep Jack Cagle, who is a hero, an absolute hero for standing up for law enforcement.
Okay, we're moving on to international subjects. How about the president saying we are closer to Armageddon than we've been since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then the White House press secretary happened to walk that back. What does that tell you?
The White House press secretary's full-time job is to walk back the president's international policy statements, because every one of them that he makes is apparently wrong, because it has to be corrected. Whether it's saying that he will put troops on the ground in Taiwan if China invades, that he will that he wants to depose Vladimir Putin as president of Russia, that he must be removed from power. That wasn't official foreign policy, but they had to walk that back. And now this whole Armageddon thing, for most of the Taiwan thing, he said that 3 or 4 times now that he would commit U.S. troops to defend Taiwan, which is not the policy of the United States government. The guy spent 40 years in Congress. He knows what the two-China policy is. He knows what our responsibilities are, and yet he just blabbers at the mouth, and the White House has to walk it back, and nobody seems to care. And he does the same thing on just about every single foreign policy issue.
Yeah, they could have Mustafa on full-time retainer, full-time with a bat phone saying, what do we do next?
Yeah, he needs to stand next to Joe Biden with a microphone and say what the president meant to say, and go on with that.
But I think that there are people around Vladimir Putin that also don't want a nuclear war. It gives them some clarity too, and there's some pressure that's being built in Russia. We've seen protests across Russia because of this war. Vladimir Putin is a murderer and a killer. He can't be trusted with nuclear weapons, and I think the president is just reminding not just us, but reminding the people in Russia that this is getting very close. And maybe there's some senior leaders in Russia that are willing to step up, because at this point, Putin will do anything to stay in power, and I don't think he's gonna. I don't think he's going to launch a nuclear war, but he can certainly bomb some of the nuclear power plants that are in Ukraine. He can certainly use other weapons that he has sent uranium pills to to infect journalists and others that were attacking him. So this guy needs a little bit of tough talk. And so both President Biden, when he is not speaking tough, he gets criticized, and when he does speak tough, he gets criticized. And so there's a choir that will criticize the president no matter what.
It's not when he speaks tough; it's when he speaks wrong. That's the issue. It's his blundering statements where he just has no mental capacity to understand the consequences of his words.
The past president did the same thing, and he was credited for being tough and saying things.
Yeah, but Mustafa, you guys criticize to the same level that.
Absolutely, I agree. I'm not disagreeing, but I'm just saying this is more of the political fodder than it's reality. If Joe Biden's saying something and the White House is walking back, that can be a strategy too. Right.
Well, to that point, I think it is the press secretary's job to walk things back. Like, that is what they do on a daily basis. And as we were talking about this, I couldn't help but to think the time that Trump went out there and said that bleach kills COVID, and then they had to walk that back.
That's a whole different thing. There's no strategy there, right?
I mean, here's the thing. I think
we're coming to a post-nuclear Holocaust because Vladimir Putin is the first. After World War II, this is the first time a nation has invaded another nation and occupied it. Right? I mean, that's just a fact.
No, actually, it's not. But that aside, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Okay, so it's not the first time it's happened.
In Europe, let me clarify. In Europe.
Hey. So look, at least I've heard estimates of 500,000 Russians fleeing the country rather than serve. more more peace protests with folks going into the street, willing to challenge the Putin administration. At the same time, all over the country of Iran, they are sustained protests, violent protests, clashes going on with between the citizenry and those in power. Who's following that? I mean, this isn't dying down, huh, Mustafa?
No, it's not dying down. It's across the country. And really what we've seen that we've never seen before is that while the protests are going, the police go after the protests, especially women, and the men in that town come after and beat the crap out of the police. We've never seen that before, that kind of pushback. And it's not just happening at Tehran. It's not just happening in big cities. It's happening across Iran. And I think it's something that's really being underreported. We need to see more of that because the people that are going to the streets are brave. They're brave for what they're doing, and it could have some real consequences in changing the dynamics in the region.
Let's get a problem there is hands in support of Mustafa's statement. I raise mine.
I agree,
with a caveat. With a caveat.
But I was going to add on Mustafa's comments that the Biden administration continues to try to get into this bad Iran deal, which will give them billions and billions of dollars to develop their missile program, to give to terrorists because they're the #1 state sponsor for terror. And of course, now they're terrorists toward their own people, and we're negotiating to give them all this money. I mean, I don't understand. Where is the common sense with that? The truth is, Trump was absolutely right to walk away from that terrible deal. And we need to be able to show support for these people. You know, in the past, I mean, when they had the Green Revolution under Obama, he didn't say boo. He wanted to do the deal. And now Biden's administration, they've had some things to say that are positive, but Iran will understand when you say the sanctions are back, because that's what needs to happen. They are a dangerous regime. And by the way, we enter up into this nuclear deal with them. At some point, they will have nuclear weapons in the next few years with intercontinental missiles that can threaten not only their region, but also the United States.
I'll tell you, Charles brought something up earlier about the mayor's intention to put the lifting of the revenue cap on the ballot. Something that's going to hurt that effort will be the pending Supreme Court decisions that will solve all family business, all family disputes on the firefighters, whether it has to do with Prop B, whether it has to do with declaring collective bargaining unconstitutional. They're directly opposed. There's no way the city can win. It's an end game, and we're going to look at a liability to the firefighters of, I've heard estimates of, $500 million, maybe more. Charles, what do you think?
I honestly, I don't think it hurts the effort. I think it helps the effort, because I think now the mayor's, because what he wants is a public safety exemption. So if that comes down, then it's like even more credit to his argument that we need to get the property tax cap lifted, despite the fact that they've known all these years that a ruling was going to come down one way or the other, and they put no money aside to prepare for that ruling. And so we're just going to have to pay for their fiscal irresponsibility yet again. So I think it's going to put us right back in the same situation, and the taxpayers going to be the ones ended up holding the bag. And the city, I mean, whether or not the city felt that their argument was strong with both of the firefighters' cases, they should have been preparing for this. I mean, you would think that there's some sort of contingency fund or something where they're putting a little bit of money away every single year, the same way they do with the rainy day fund, in preparation for the outcome of this lawsuit. But no, we don't think that forward. We just think until the next election cycle.
Two-thirds of the city budget is in public safety, about a little over $900 million, almost $1 billion in police, and $550 billion in firefighters. So when people say, Charles, as you're thinking about this, like, put some money away, well, I mean, 2/3 of the public is public safety budget. So if we want more police, we're going to have to come up with the money, especially that the federal money that was coming in due to COVID is not going to exist anymore. So what the mayor's trying to do is, if you want more police and if you want more public safety, if we have to meet these pension obligations, we can't print money, right? We like the federal government, we have to have the authorization from voters to be able to do that, because this is what people want. They want more safety and they want more security, and the city provides it in buckets of money, but there's a limit to it because it's not like there's a lot of other discretionary funds in the city. I mean, it's a big bureaucracy, and people can always find something and say, "Oh, this is not right," or maybe we can tighten the belt here and there. But these are contractual obligations, right? So it's not the city budget is it runs pretty much like by the contractual obligations it has.
But we've seen property tax increase every single year, and not to mention every city when they flooded down from the federal government with and I will call it out because yes, Trump started this federal relief aid. When they flooded these cities and these counties with federal relief aid, it was much more than what they lost from property and sales taxes. They made out what much better. And a lot of cities across the country, when you look at them, have used that money to shore up pension benefits. They use that money to pay down unfunded debt. They used it for other things that were going to set them up on a better fiscal path in the future.
We didn't do that.
But we also came from record hurricanes, and
we got federal relief aid and state relief aid.
But we didn't come into the pandemic without issues. We came into building back from the hurricanes, and so yes, but at the same time, we've had a record population growth too. Yes, valuation's gone up, but our population's gone up too, right? So
the city of Houston's
population has shrunk
negligibly.
Yeah, that's not true.
Look, I mean, if you look at the population in the unincorporated areas, it's grown substantially.
Well, that's not the city of Houston.
Yeah. People think that all the problems are just by the borders, like you're really contained. You're not. You have to do a lot more, and we've had to do a lot more.
Yeah, this sounds like you guys pointing the finger at Republicans at State House and Abbott and Patrick for not fixing the grid, and then charging the taxpayers via the surcharges we're going to have for 30 years for their mistake.
Well, I mean, I think the accusation there is that you were in direct conversations with power generators and you cut really sweet deals to them and they made out like bandits, right? That's the distinction.
And the taxpayer gets stuck with the tab.
Right, absolutely. That's it. Here, what we're talking about, that there's some real challenges on the ground, that crime has gone up across the country, as we've talked about on this program over and over again. And then when it comes to the city of Houston, we do need more revenue if we're going to hire more cops. And one way to do it is to begin to create an exemption for the cap when it comes to public safety.
Well, as you and I have discussed many times, the mayor had multiple off-ramps to settle the deal with the firefighters. So this is a crisis of his making. I'm on the record. There are lots of people on the record there.
Yeah,
hey, Chau, what's going on in your radar? What's the social issue that is not getting enough attention?
Well, we talk about it a lot. We had our quarterly Women's Commission meeting at the City of Houston, and we're still looking at a number of things. But the biggest topic right now is domestic violence in our city. The mayor has urged us to make this a priority issue, to look at real solutions. And it's complicated, right? Because you can't look at domestic violence without looking at things like race and oppression and class and communities, to bolster, to lessen violence. You've got to provide things like childcare for women, pay equity. Those are gender equity. Those are issues that are more complicated than just a soundbite, 30 to 45 seconds that we offer here. So that's really what we're looking at. I'm the chair of the family committee. We're looking at creating a women and girls equity fund and looking at the state of women and girls. It's not been done. There are other big cities that have big equity funds for women and girls. We don't have that in our city to really fund areas where there are gaps in our community. So those are things that we as women and the leaders of the Women's Commission are looking at. Because we know that domestic violence is a huge, huge issue. When we look at gun violence and we look at, Sheriff Gonzalez, it's usually about 1 in 5, a little less than 1 in 5 of all homicides are domestic violence related. He's looking at 1 in 3.
Wow.
Chau, two questions. You mentioned pay equity and daycare. I think childcare. And forgive me for my ignorance. How does that relate? Is it giving them the tools to get out of a situation? Is that what it is? Okay.
So money and kids are usually the biggest barriers. 99% money, which also leads to having children, right? Or the biggest barriers of leaving an abusive, violent relationship. I worked at Hawk, and a lot of the women that we saw who went to the shelter are poor, are Black and brown and don't have the privilege of escaping an abusive relationship because of the barriers of accessing resources like a job, like childcare, like abortion. So that's why you look at those intersections, those complicated intersections that people can't, you can't really address in a soundbite or two.
Now,
Hey,
my
I
second
talked
question.
to, go ahead, Charles.
Well, my second question is, and I know you don't agree with this, but why not explore firearm education and firearm ownership for women who are in those situations?
I absolutely agree with firearm education and awareness. I just attended the Texas Gun Sense event in Austin last week. Responsible gun ownership is really what we're looking at, just common sense solutions. And really the firearm access and education for women who are in an abusive relationship is what? Know where your guns are, store them safely, get them away from your abuser. That's education.
Well, how about learn how to use it to defend yourself? That's an issue. I've got a really good friend, a woman in New Mexico, if I can finish, a woman in New Mexico that runs camps for abused women to come out there to New Mexico. They do yoga in the morning and shooting in the afternoon, and these women come out of there in tears because they feel like they've been empowered. They feel their confidence is up. They feel like they can defend themselves. They can take care of themselves. They don't have to be enslaved by an abusive husband or abusive spouse. In my wife's law practice, I see abused women that unfortunately go back into those things because of what you said, because either they don't have a place to go live, they don't have a house, they don't have money, all of these kind of things. A woman whose eye socket got broken by this man who beat the tar out of her, she goes back to him because she's got nowhere to go. So we need to address issues like that. But a woman should be able to defend herself in a responsible manner, in a manner that takes care of herself completely.
Well, it's not just for safety. You're talking about risk reduction, right? Like, let's take a firearm, lady, and learn how to use it. It's more than that. How about we put the onus on the man and say, stop abusing women?
It's very easy. If you can get a judge to sign a restraining order, a temporary restraining order, a protection order of protection, that person can no longer own or possess a firearm. They have to get rid of the firearms and get them out of the house. They can't even go buy another firearm while they're under a protection order. So there are mechanisms in place, but I will tell you, it's very difficult to get some of these family law judges to issue these kind of protective orders, and you guys need to put pressure on these judges to look at that issue. Why are they not protecting these women? Why are they forcing them back into these homes where they can't defend themselves?
And I can't tell you how many protective orders have been issued and they've been violated. Again, it just goes back to teach boys and teach men. Let's really, establish an office.
That's a little sexist.
No, that's not sexist.
It's not sexist.
Boys? We're not talking about boys.
That's not sexist, and I'll tell you why that's not sexist. Because the majority, 90% of gender violence is inflicted by men against women.
Boys?
Teach boys. I'm talking about violence prevention, right? We don't talk enough about establishing an office of violence prevention to add things like social emotional learning in school. And that's where the onus is. I mean, that really begs the question for a broader conversation and dialogue around violence prevention. I think, Bob, I agree with you. It's a both and. Women need to be empowered to protect themselves, but men need to know how to behave. Yeah. And I'm not trying to be, some feminazi about that.
No, you're not.
Facts speak for themselves.
There's a cycle of violence that happens, and in order to stop it, it's not when the abuser is actually beating the spouse, but try to get them early in life to be able to teach respect, and teaching respect to young men is not a bad thing. Right?
No.
Teaching respect for women, for your mothers, and for your sisters, and for your spouses in the future is not a bad thing, and it needs to be taught. It needs to be taught, across the board. Because if your father is an abuser, how are you going to learn not to be if other men in your life don't teach you that?
Yeah, and that's what the statistics say. You're either going to be abused yourself, or you're going to be abused, right? If you're in a situation, a family of origin, when there's abuse and violence, chances are you will be the abuser or you'll be, the victim. So there's Office of Family Violence programs across the country. We've talked about in terms of policy issues. Here's a panel of policy professionals looking at those issues seriously and saying, hey, how are we going to solve a greater issue and prevent what we're seeing right now that we talk about for the last hour: crime, violence against women, violence against children, guns, education awareness. I absolutely believe in responsible gun ownership. I know that hunting is a thing in Texas, right? There are many women who are gun owners and gun hunters. You hunt with guns, who believe in just common sense guns. We don't need to have AR-15s in the hands of 18-year-olds. That's just common sense stuff, right? At least that gets us one step. It's just one small step towards a greater solution. And that's just keeping our communities safer, keeping girls and women safer, and teaching boys and men to behave.
I've got a question for Mustafa. Have you overseen political ads, the construction of political ads?
Yes.
Okay. When a claim is not sourced within the context of an ad that has multiple sourcings for all but one claim, what does that mean?
Look, a political ad is just that. It's a political ad, right? And I think you're talking specifically about the Alexander Mueller and the.
It's not sourced.
Yeah, so I got it. It's not sourced, but it's also not been denied. Mueller's not coming out saying, I'm pro-choice, correct the record, judge, because I've been pro-choice all my life. And by not saying that, that's also a message, right? Because she can she can make a statement tomorrow. She can come out on Facebook and say, by the way, I think that's a false charge. You didn't source it. You've never heard me say that I'm pro-life. I'm actually a pro-choice Republican.
So are we everything that we don't vocally say we are not? Like, do we have
That's
to
ridiculous.
The justification
on,
of political
Mustafa.
ads, and
Just
we
assume.
can look at political ads in
That's
You
general.
just assume.
That's a joke. It's not an issue, Mustafa. Maybe she would be willing
It
to
is
talk
an
about
issue. The
criminal
whole country's
justice.
talking about it at every dinner table.
No.
It's every
What does the
political
county
ad.
judge have to do with abortion? You have an answer? Because the answer is nothing.
Well, there's a lot. Look,
It's a rabbit trail because Lena is running from her record. That is the fact. Okay, she wants to talk about everything about her dismal record as county judge. So look, let's talk about abortion. Let's talk. Maybe she'll start talking about the Ukraine war. Let's see if other things we can do to distract people. But Lena's not even talking to the voters. That's your problem, Mustafa. She's hiding.
look,
Tell her to come out of the closet and actually campaign.
Like, I know
Tell her
you
to
think
debate.
to get reactions,
Tell her to
but
debate.
there's no reaction coming because you
Okay,
said that.
tell her
All
to
you say
debate.
is to.
It's not an issue of the race.
Mustafa, advise her to debate. Then she can ask all
Like,
the
I love it
questions
for
she wants.
Patrick. I love it for those guys to also show up for debates. I love it for those guys to show up to editorial board.
Abbott debated.
Abbott did? Yeah, where's Patrick? Where is the Attorney General of Texas in country today?
So Lena's not debating because others
where's
aren't.
Paxton? Paxton can't even
Okay.
meet with somebody who's trying to
Good.
serve for a federal warrant, much less show up for a debate.
All
I have
right.
not heard from you as a
Well, I'm
lawyer
talking
to
about
talk
Lena.
Paxton. Right? I
Okay.
mean, but he's the Attorney General. You're a lawyer in the state. Where is your outrage that an indicted felon's on the ballot and he will not debate?
Okay. Let's talk about, first of all, let's talk. You want to go, you want to go into, you want to throw these, you throw these words, but you throw these words around and you're not fair, Mustafa. So here's the facts. Paxton was indicted on something related to securities that 10 years ago was not a crime. All it was a civil penalty, but the legislature changed it, okay? That's what happened. The indictment was, it was filed 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and it's never gone to trial, okay? So if you believe in our system, like I do, you're innocent until proven guilty. He's not been proven guilty, okay? That's the bottom line. So you keep throwing that around. I don't think the case ever goes to trial, to be honest with you. I'm not even sure they can make the case. But regardless.
Of his lieutenants resigned because they feel like there was an FBI, sting about to take place.
Okay,
that's
well, that
another
was
thing.
2 years. That was 2
that-
years
that-
ago.
That
That's
wasn't
2 years ago, and nothing's
7
happened.
Republican
Nothing's happened.
appointed people resigned. and
Nothing's
unison.
happened because of
Yeah, so here's the thing, Mustafa. Immediately after those resignations, one of those guys went to go work for George P. Bush's campaign. I wonder
Yes.
why. I wonder
Yes.
why.
George P.
But here's the thing: where I do agree with
What
you,
did the other
though,
6
is
do?
where I do agree with you, though, is that yes,
Private practice.
Paxton, Patrick, Hager, they should all be debated. I mean, it should
They
be a
should.
requirement you debate. And the fact that our county judge
Let's all agree to that then. Let's make it a requirement.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, let's end our session on that. Everybody who, if you run for office, you should be required to debate.
I'm
Hand
okay
up.
with that.
I'd
I'm for
vote.
that.
All right.
I'm good with that.
Okay, we're
It
gonna
has to be in the
there.
agreement.
We all agree.